The lights in the Veterans Hall dimmed as Commander Zixthala walked to the speaking platform. Her forearms moved with careful precision, and the crystalline plates on her blue skin caught the overhead lights. The monthly gathering always drew a mixed crowd, but tonight felt different. Word had spread that the Viridian commander would finally speak about her time with the humans during the Third Terran conflict. She placed her hands on the podium and looked out at the audience. Kotharians with their tentacle faces sat next to bug-like Zorathians. A few Galan traders occupied the back rows, their massive forms barely fitting in the standard chairs. Everyone knew about the human wars, but few had actually fought alongside them. Zixthala's translator device clicked as she began to speak. Her voice was steady, but those who knew her could see the slight tremor in her secondary arms. I served as a liaison officer with the human military for 18 months, she said. Before that assignment, I thought I understood warfare. I had fought in 12 campaigns across 7 systems. I had seen species destroy entire worlds out of spite. I believed I had witnessed every form of military cruelty the galaxy could produce. She paused, her large black eyes scanning the crowd. I was wrong. A murmur ran through the audience. The Viridians were known for their tactical expertise. If one of their commanders was disturbed by something, it was worth hearing. The briefing I received before my assignment was simple, Zixthala continued. Humans were described as a primitive species with basic weapons and simple tactics. They had numbers, but little else. My superiors told me they fought like most young species do, with emotion instead of strategy, anger instead of planning. She touched a control on the podium, and a holographic image appeared. It showed a small, unremarkable human male in military uniform. His hair was gray at the temples, and deep lines marked his face. To most species in the audience, he looked weak and fragile. This is Lieutenant Colonel Jake Murphy. He commanded the 7th Expeditionary Force during the Battle of Kepler Station. When I first met him, I thought there had been some mistake. He was smaller than most species consider combat-ready. He had only 2 arms, no natural armor, and his reaction time was slower than standard galactic military requirements. Zixthala's voice dropped lower. He also terrified me more than any enemy I had ever faced. The hall grew quieter. Even the large Galans leaned forward to hear better. My first day with Murphy's unit, I asked him about human military doctrine. I wanted to understand their strategy, their preferred tactics, their standard responses to different combat situations. Murphy just smiled and said humans don't have standard responses. She clicked to another image, showing Murphy with his officers around a tactical display. He explained that human military training focuses on something they call adaptive thinking. While other species train their soldiers to follow proven tactics, humans train their soldiers to create new tactics in real time. Every battle is treated as a unique problem that requires a unique solution. Zixthala's secondary arms gestured to emphasize her point. I thought this was inefficient. Proven tactics exist because they work. Why reinvent strategy in the middle of combat? Murphy's answer was simple. Because the enemy expects proven tactics. The commander's voice took on a tone that made several audience members shift uncomfortably. 3 days after I joined his unit, we received orders to defend it. Supply depot on Kepler Station. Intelligence reported that Krillian forces were moving to capture it. Standard galactic military doctrine called for establishing defensive positions around the depot and holding them until reinforcements arrived. She paused for a long moment. Murphy had different ideas. The hologram changed to show a tactical map of Kepler Station. Instead of defending the depot, Murphy ordered his troops to evacuate all the supplies. When I asked why, he said the depot wasn't important. The supplies were. He planned to let the Krillians take an empty building. Several Audience members made sounds of confusion. The strategy made no sense by conventional standards. But Murphy wasn't finished. After evacuating the supplies, he had his engineers rig the depot with explosives. Not to destroy it immediately, but to detonate on a timer. He wanted the Krillians to occupy the building, get comfortable, and then Zixthala made a gesture with all 4 arms. But even that wasn't the worst part. Murphy had his communications officer broadcast fake distress signals from the depot. He made it sound like human forces were trapped inside and desperately fighting off the Krillian attack. Other Krillian units heard these signals and moved to support the attack. The hall was completely silent now. By the time the depot exploded, Murphy had drawn 3 full Krillian battalions away from their primary objectives. The explosion didn't just destroy enemy forces. It created a massive diversion that allowed human reinforcements to strike Krillian positions across the entire system. Zixthala's translator clicked as she continued. I realized then that Murphy hadn't been defending a supply depot. He had been hunting an entire enemy fleet. The depot was just bait. She looked directly at the audience, her black eyes reflecting the overhead lights. When I asked Murphy how he had predicted the Krillian response so accurately, he said something that still haunts me. He said humans don't predict enemy behavior. They create it. The commander's voice grew quieter, forcing everyone to strain to hear. 3 weeks later, our combined force was surrounded by superior Krillian numbers. We were outnumbered 10-2. 1, with no possibility of reinforcement or retreat. By all military logic, we faced certain destruction. She paused again, letting the tension build. Murphy gathered his officers for a final briefing. I expected him to discuss surrender terms, or perhaps plan a desperate final assault. Instead, he looked at the tactical display showing enemy positions completely surrounding us, smiled that same terrible smile, and said 4 words that changed everything I thought I knew about warfare. Zixthala's 4 arms spread wide as she delivered Murphy's words. Now they can't miss us. The hall erupted in confused murmurs. The logic made no sense to anyone present. I didn't understand what he meant then, Zixthala said, her voice cutting through the noise. But I would learn. Over the following months, I would discover that humans don't just fight wars. She stepped back from the podium, her crystalline skin seeming to dim in the overhead lights. They turn war itself into a weapon. Zixthala moved closer to the microphone as the audience settled down. Her 4 arms trembled slightly as she prepared to continue her story. The Veterans Hall was completely quiet now, with every alien species represented hanging on her words. Murphy's words about the enemy not being able to miss us made no sense at the time, she said. But I learned that humans rarely say things that make immediate sense. They think in layers, like those puzzle boxes from the Centauri systems. She activated the holographic display again, showing a 3-dimensional map of Proxima Ridge. The Battle of Proxima Ridge happened 6 weeks after Kepler Station. This time, I was assigned to work directly with Major Lisa Carter, a human engineer. Carter had lost her entire family when Krillian forces bombed the civilian colony on New Denver. I expected her to be angry, maybe reckless. Instead, she was perfectly calm. The hologram zoomed in on the ridge itself, showing the steep terrain and narrow passes. The Krillians held the high ground with heavy artillery. Standard military doctrine said we needed air support to dislodge them. But our fighters couldn't operate in the area because of Krillian anti-aircraft systems. Any direct assault would result in massive casualties. Zixthala's translator clicked as she continued. Carter studied the tactical situation for 3 days. She didn't speak much during those 3 days, just stared at the maps and made notes. When she finally presented her plan, I thought she had suffered some kind of mental breakdown. Several audience members leaned forward, curious about what the human engineer had proposed. Carter wanted to collapse the entire ridge. A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. The gallon traders in the back made deep rumbling sounds of disbelief. She had calculated that the ridge was geologically unstable. A series of precisely placed explosives could trigger a landslide that would bury the Krillian positions. But the plan required someone to climb the ridge at night, plant the charges, and escape before detonation. Zixthala paused, her black eyes reflecting the overhead lights. The climb was considered impossible. The ridge was too steep, too exposed, and too well guarded. Carter's own engineers told her the plan couldn't work. That's when I learned something important about humans. They don't accept the word impossible. She changed the holographic display to show Carter herself, a small human female with short, brown hair and intelligent eyes. Carter didn't argue with her engineers. Instead, she asked them a simple question. What would make the impossible merely difficult? They spent the next day redesigning the entire operation. The commander's voice took on a tone of reluctant admiration. Carter's final plan didn't involve climbing the ridge at all. Instead, she had her team create a diversion on the opposite side of the valley. While Krillian forces focused on what they thought was a human assault, Carter used mining equipment to tunnel through the base of the ridge. Zixthala's secondary arms gestured to show the underground approach. The tunnel took 4 days to complete. During those 4 days, Carter had other human units conduct false attacks all around the valley. The Krillians never suspected that. The real threat was coming from below. She clicked to a new image showing the aftermath of the battle. When the charges detonated, they didn't just collapse the ridge. Carter had calculated the blast to redirect an underground river. The landslide was followed by flooding that made the entire area impassable for weeks. The alien commander's voice grew quieter, but that wasn't the end of Carter's plan. The flooding created a new lake in the valley. Carter had already arranged for human engineers to build a dam and power station. Within 2 months, the battlefield had become a source of clean energy for 3 human colonies. Several audience members made sounds of amazement. Turning a battlefield into a power plant was beyond their understanding. I asked Carter how she had thought so far ahead. She told me that humans don't just plan to win battles, they plan to win the peace that comes after battles. Zixthala moved to a different section of the platform. Around the same time I worked with Sergeant Danny Torres, a specialist in what humans call psychological warfare. Torres looked even less impressive than Murphy. He was young, barely out of training, and spoke so quietly that I had to strain to hear him. The hologram showed a young human male with a friendly face and calm demeanor. Torres was assigned to gather intelligence on enemy positions. Instead of using traditional reconnaissance, he did something that still disturbs me. He started a conversation. The audience looked confused. Several aliens made questioning sounds. Torres contacted Krillian commanders directly using captured communication equipment. He didn't pretend to be someone else. He introduced himself as a human intelligence officer. Then he started talking. Zixthala's voice took on a tone of disturbed fascination. Torres told the Krillians about a new human bioweapon called Project Nightmare. He described how it targeted specific alien nervous systems, causing madness before death. He provided detailed technical specifications, complete with fake scientific data. She paused for effect. None of it was real. Humans had no such weapon. But Torres made it sound completely believable. He even offered to surrender the weapon's location in exchange for safe passage for human civilians. The commander's 4 arms moved in what was clearly a gesture of unease. The Krillian commanders became obsessed with finding this weapon. They diverted 3 full battalions from active combat to search for something that didn't exist. They interrogated prisoners about bioweapon deployment. They started wearing protective gear that slowed their movement. Zixthala's translator clicked as she continued. But Torres wasn't finished. He contacted other Krillian units and told them different stories. He told one group that humans had developed invisible soldiers. He told another group that human weapons could shoot through solid rock. Each story was carefully designed to make the enemy afraid of something specific. The hall was completely silent as the implications became clear. Within 2 weeks, Krillian forces were so paranoid that they started shooting at shadows. They wasted ammunition on false targets. They retreated from positions that weren't actually under attack. Torres had turned their own imagination against them. Zixthala's voice dropped to almost a whisper. When I asked Torres how he knew what would frighten each enemy unit, he explained that humans study fear the same way other species study mathematics. They know exactly which fears will paralyze, which fears will enrage, and which fears will make an enemy destroy itself. She stepped back from the microphone, her crystalline skin seeming duller under the lights. I began to understand that humans don't just fight their enemies. They make their enemies fight themselves. The commander looked out at the mixed audience of alien species. And that was only the beginning of what I would learn about human warfare. Zixthala's crystalline skin had grown noticeably darker as she continued her testimony. The veterans' hall remained silent, but the tension in the room was thick enough to cut. She moved away from the podium and paced slowly across the platform. Her 4 arms clasped behind her back. The siege of Luna Base was where I truly understood what humans become when they face extinction, she said. I had thought the previous battles were examples of human creativity. I was wrong. Those were just humans being clever. At Luna Base, I saw humans fighting for survival. She stopped pacing and faced the audience directly. The siege lasted 6 months. Krillian forces had surrounded the base completely, cutting off all supply lines. No food, no medical supplies, no ammunition could reach us. Standard military calculations showed we had supplies for maybe 8 weeks if we rationed carefully. The holographic display showed Luna Base from orbit, a small cluster of buildings surrounded by enemy positions that stretched for kilometers in every direction. Colonel Rick Barnes commanded the base. He was older than Murphy, maybe 60 human years, with gray hair and tired eyes. When the siege began, Barnes called all senior officers to a meeting. I expected him to discuss rationing plans or possible breakout attempts. Zixthala's voice grew quieter. Instead, Barnes asked each of us to write down how long we thought we could hold out. Most estimates were between 6 and 10 weeks. Barnes collected the papers, looked at them, and smiled. Then he said something that made my blood freeze. She paused, letting the tension build. He said we weren't planning to hold out. We were planning to win. Several audience members made sounds of confusion. Winning a siege while completely surrounded and cut off seemed impossible. Barnes explained that humans had been studying siege warfare for thousands of years. He said every successful siege in human history had one thing in common: the defenders eventually ran out of something essential: food, water, ammunition, or hope. The commander's translator clicked as she continued. Barnes had decided that Luna Base wouldn't run out of anything. Instead, the enemy would run out of patience. She activated a new holographic display showing the interior of Luna Base. The first thing Barnes did was introduce me to Dr. Helen Price, the base's chief medical officer. Price was a small woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice. She reminded me of the healers on my home world. That impression lasted exactly 30 seconds. Zixthala's forearms moved in, what was clearly a gesture of deep unease. Price had been studying captured Krillian physiology for months. She knew more about Krillian biology than most Krillians did. She could tell me exactly how their digestive systems worked, how their nervous systems processed information, how their respiratory systems filtered air. The alien commander's voice took on a tone of horrified fascination. Price wasn't studying Krillian biology to help wounded prisoners. She was developing ways to kill them more efficiently. She had created biological agents that could target specific alien species while leaving humans completely unharmed. A ripple of shock went through the audience. Biological warfare was considered one of the most horrific forms of combat in galactic society. Price showed me her laboratory. She had samples of blood, tissue, and genetic material from 12 different species. She was working on what she called species-specific pathogens, diseases that would only affect one type of alien. Zixthala's voice dropped to almost a whisper. She already had working prototypes for 3 species, including Krillians. She could have released them at any time and ended the siege within days. When I asked why she hadn't, Price said Barnes wanted to save them for the right moment. The commander moved to a different part of the platform. While Price worked on biological weapons, Barnes introduced me to the civilian population. Luna Base housed about 3,000 civilians, families of military personnel, researchers, and support staff. I expected them to be frightened and demoralized by the siege. She paused, her black eyes scanning the audience. Instead, I found them organized, determined, and absolutely terrifying. The holographic display changed to show a school classroom where human children sat attentively, while an elderly woman taught them something at a blackboard. This is Martha Bell, a retired schoolteacher who ran the base's education program. I visited her classroom to see how the children were coping with the siege. Bell was teaching them chemistry. Zixthala's voice took on a tone of disturbed amazement. The children, some as young as 8 human years, were learning how to make explosives from common household items. Bell taught them which cleaning chemicals could be combined to create poison gas. She showed them how to turn kitchen knives into effective weapons. Several audience members made sounds of horror. The idea of training children for warfare was beyond their comprehension. When I asked Bell why she was teaching children such things, she said that if the base fell, the children would need to know how to fight. She said human children had been defending their homes for thousands of years, and these children would be no different. The commander's translator clicked rapidly as she spoke faster. But Bell's classroom was just the beginning. Every civilian on the base had been assigned combat duties. The cooks were learning to poison food supplies. The janitors were learning to sabotage equipment. The doctors were learning to perform field surgery under combat conditions. Zixthala's forearms spread wide. I realized that humans don't have civilians in the way other species understand the term. Every human is a potential soldier, regardless of age, gender, or occupation. She clicked to a new image, showing a young human boy with innocent eyes and a friendly smile. This is Kevin Walsh. He was 10 years old when I met him. His parents worked in the base's communications center. Kevin seemed like a normal child. He played games, asked questions, and helped with small tasks around the base. The commander's voice grew darker. 2 weeks into the siege, Krillian patrols started venturing closer to the base perimeter. They were testing our defenses, looking for weak points. Kevin volunteered to help with reconnaissance. She paused, clearly struggling with what she was about to say. Kevin would approach Krillian patrols, carrying a bag of food. He looked harmless, just a hungry child hoping to trade for something to eat. The Krillians would take pity on him and give him small amounts of food in exchange for information about the base. Zixthala's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. What the Krillians didn't know was that Kevin was leading them into carefully prepared ambush sites. He would guide them to areas where human snipers were waiting, or where the ground had been mined, or where other traps had been set. The hall was completely silent now, the horror of the revelation sinking in. Kevin killed more enemy soldiers than most trained warriors, and he did it by pretending to be weak and helpless. When I asked him how he could do such things, he said, his parents had taught him that protecting family was more important than anything else. Zix Thala stepped back from the microphone. By the end of the siege, I understood that humans don't just fight wars. They live war. Every human, from the youngest child to the oldest adult, is part of their war machine. She looked out at the audience of alien veterans. And the siege had only been preparation for something much worse. Zix Thala returned to the podium, her forearms shaking visibly now. The veterans' hall had grown completely still, as if every alien present was afraid to make any sound that might interrupt her testimony. She gripped the edges of the podium with her primary hands while her secondary arms gestured weakly. The Battle of Earth's moon was where I learned the truth about human warfare, she said. Everything I had witnessed before, the creative tactics, the psychological warfare, the involvement of civilians, all of it had been preparation for this moment. She activated the holographic display, showing Earth's moon with massive fleets positioned around it. General Patricia Lewis commanded the Human Defense Forces. She was only 28 years old, which made her incredibly young for such a high position. When I first met her, I assumed she had gained her rank through political connections or family influence. The hologram showed a young human female with sharp eyes and an intense expression. I was wrong. Lewis had earned her position by successfully defending 3 separate colonies, using tactics that horrified even her own allies. She was known throughout the human military as someone who could win impossible battles. Zix Thala's voice took on a tone of reluctant respect mixed with fear. Lewis called a meeting of all senior officers on the first day of the battle. She spread out tactical displays showing enemy positions throughout the solar system. The Krillian fleet was massive, more than twice the size of all human forces combined. The commander's translator clicked as she continued. Lewis looked at these displays for several minutes without speaking. Then she smiled and said something that made everyone in the room go quiet. She said this wasn't the third Terran conflict. This was the third time humans had let their enemies attack them. Several audience members made sounds of confusion. The statement made no sense by conventional military logic. Lewis explained that what we called the First and Second Terran conflicts hadn't been real wars. They had been intelligence-gathering operations. Humans had deliberately allowed themselves to be attacked so they could study their enemies. Zix Thala's 4 arms spread wide in a gesture of amazement. For 20 years, humans had been losing battles on purpose. They had sacrificed colonies, abandoned strategic positions, and allowed thousands of their own people to die, all to learn how different alien species fought wars. The alien commander's voice grew darker. Every defeat had been carefully planned. To reveal specific information, how quickly could Krillian forces mobilize? What were their preferred tactics? How did they treat prisoners? What were their supply requirements? How did they communicate with each other? She paused, letting the implications sink in. Lewis had complete profiles on every enemy commander. She knew their personal histories, their tactical preferences, their psychological weaknesses. She knew which ones were cautious and which ones were aggressive. She knew which ones could be trusted and which ones would betray their own allies. The holographic display changed to show communication intercepts and intelligence reports. But the intelligence gathering went far deeper than military tactics. Lewis introduced me to Private First Class Tony Garcia, a communications specialist who spoke 17 different alien languages fluently. The image showed a young human male with unremarkable features and a friendly smile. Garcia wasn't just a translator. He was part of a program that had been placing human agents in alien societies for decades. Garcia himself had lived on 3 different alien worlds, working as a trader, a technician, and a cultural exchange student. Zix Thala's voice took on a tone of horrified realization. Garcia knew more about Krillian culture than most Krillians. He could predict how they would react to specific situations. He knew which of their religious beliefs could be exploited, which of their social customs could be turned against them, which of their leaders could be corrupted or manipulated. The commander moved away from the podium again, pacing across the OSE platform. Garcia showed me reports from agents throughout the galaxy. Humans had been living among us for decades, studying our weaknesses, mapping our infrastructure, identifying critical targets. Every trade agreement, every diplomatic mission, every cultural exchange had been cover for intelligence operations. She stopped pacing and faced the audience directly. I realized that humans had been preparing for galactic war since their first contact with alien species. They had never intended to remain isolated on Earth. They had always planned to become a galactic power. The holographic display showed a complex web of connections spanning dozens of star systems. The scope of human infiltration was beyond anything I had imagined. They had agents in government positions, military commands, research facilities, and commercial enterprises. They had been influencing galactic politics for decades without anyone realizing it. Zix Thala's translator clicked rapidly as she spoke faster. Lewis showed me how humans had manipulated the events that led to the Third Terran conflict. They had encouraged tensions between different species. They had provided weapons to both sides of conflicts. They had spread rumors and misinformation to create instability. The commander's voice dropped to almost a whisper. The entire war had been orchestrated by humans to justify their integration into galactic society as equals, rather than as a primitive species to be protected or controlled. She clicked to a new image showing Captain Steve Rogers, a human officer working at multiple communication stations simultaneously. Captain Steve Rogers was Lewis's coordination officer. I watched him manage communication with sleeper agents across 12 different worlds at the same time. He was coordinating sabotage operations, information warfare, and political manipulation on a galactic scale. Zix Thala's forearms trembled as she continued. Rogers wasn't just coordinating with military agents. He was in contact with humans, working in alien media organizations, educational institutions, and religious groups. They had been shaping alien public opinion about humans for years. The alien commander's voice took on a tone of absolute horror. I realized that the battle we were fighting around Earth's moon was just a small part of a much larger campaign. While we focused on military targets, humans were conducting psychological warfare against entire civilizations. She paused, clearly struggling to continue. Rogers showed me reports from human agents who were encouraging alien species to fight each other instead of focusing on the human threat. They were promoting ethnic conflicts, trade disputes, and territorial disagreements that would keep potential enemies distracted. The holographic display showed propaganda materials in dozens of alien languages. Humans had created false news, stories, fake historical documents, and manufactured evidence of alien atrocities. They were making different species hate each other more than they feared humanity. Zix Thala's voice grew quieter, but the most terrifying part wasn't the scope of human operations. It was how long they had been planning. Rogers showed me documents dating back 50 years, detailed plans for galactic conquest that had been developed before humans had even left their own solar system. She stepped back from the microphone. I understood then that humans hadn't been reacting to galactic events. They had been creating them. Every major conflict, every political crisis, every economic disruption of the past 50 years had been part of their plan. The commander looked out at the silent audience. The Third Terran conflict wasn't a war. It was humanity's graduation ceremony. Zixthala moved to the center of the platform, her crystalline skin now almost black under the hall's lights. The silence in the Veterans Hall was complete, as if every alien present had stopped breathing. She stood without moving for a long moment, gathering the strength to finish her testimony. "The war ended 3 days after the Battle of Earth's moon," she said finally. "But it didn't end the way anyone expected. There was no final assault, no decisive victory, no surrender ceremony. Instead, Admiral Nancy Wright requested a meeting with all galactic military commanders. The holographic display showed a conference room where representatives from dozens of species sat around a massive table. Wright was Earth's chief negotiator, but she wasn't there to discuss surrender terms. She was there to explain why the war was over and why humanity had won. Zixthala's voice took on a tone of weary resignation. Wright brought with her a single data crystal. She placed it on the conference table and said it contained proof that humanity was ready to join Galactic Society as an equal member. Then she activated the crystal. The commander's 4 arms moved in gestures of helpless amazement. The crystal contained detailed maps of every major alien installation in the galaxy. Military bases, government facilities, research stations, commercial centers, everything. Wright had blueprints showing exactly how each facility was constructed, where its weak points were located, and how it could be destroyed most efficiently. Several audience members made sounds of disbelief. The scope of such intelligence gathering seemed impossible, but the maps were just the beginning. Wright had complete personnel files on key individuals in every alien government and military organization. She knew who could be trusted, who could be bribed, who could be blackmailed, and who would have to be eliminated. Zixthala's translator clicked as she continued. Wright explained that humans had been mapping galactic civilization for decades. Every human trader, diplomat, tourist, or student had been gathering intelligence. They had been building a complete picture of galactic society while pretending to be harmless newcomers. The alien commander's voice grew darker. Wright showed us communication intercepts, proving that humans could monitor any conversation between any alien species anywhere in the galaxy. They had tapped into every major communication network, broken every encryption system, and infiltrated every information database. She paused, clearly struggling with the implications. But Wright wasn't finished. She activated another section of the crystal that showed something even more terrifying. Humans had established sleeper networks on hundreds of worlds. They had agents in positions of authority throughout galactic society. The holographic display showed a web of connections spanning the entire galaxy. Wright revealed that humans had been influencing galactic policy for decades without anyone realizing it. They had been promoting laws that favored human interests, encouraging research that supported human goals, and preventing actions that might threaten human expansion. Zixthala's voice took on a tone of horrified realization. I understood then that the war had never been about territory or resources. It had been humanity's job interview for galactic citizenship. They had demonstrated not just their ability to fight, but their capacity for long-term strategic thinking on a galactic scale. The commander moved back toward the podium. Wright explained that humanity had never intended to conquer the galaxy through military force alone. They had won by proving they were too dangerous to exclude and too valuable to destroy. She activated a new section of the holographic display showing economic and technological data. Humans had solutions to problems that had plagued galactic society for centuries. They had new technologies, innovative strategies, and creative approaches to old challenges. But they had kept these advantages hidden until the right moment. Zixthala's 4 arms spread wide. Wright offered to share human knowledge and expertise with all galactic species, but only as equal partners. She made it clear that humanity would not accept a subordinate position in galactic society. The alien commander's voice grew quieter. The choice was simple. Galactic leaders could accept humanity as equals and benefit from their knowledge, or they could continue fighting and watch their civilizations collapse under the weight of human sabotage and manipulation. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Every alien leader at that meeting understood that humanity had already won. The only question was whether the transition would be peaceful or violent. The holographic display changed to show Admiral Wright herself, a middle-aged human woman with calm eyes and a slight smile. Wright concluded her presentation by explaining that the war had achieved its primary objective. Humanity had demonstrated their capabilities to the galaxy and established their right to equal treatment. She said the conflict could end immediately if galactic society was willing to negotiate in good faith. Zixthyla's translator clicked as she continued. But Wright had one final revelation that changed everything. She introduced Colonel Pete Johnson, who had been serving as liaison officer between human and alien forces during the post-battle negotiations. The image showed a tall human male with graying hair and tired eyes. Johnson explained that everything we had witnessed during the war had been humanity operating under significant restrictions. They had been fighting with only a fraction of their true capabilities, using outdated equipment and limited personnel. The commander's voice took on a tone of absolute terror. Johnson revealed that Earth's population was much larger than anyone had suspected. Humans had been hiding their true numbers, their advanced technology, and their industrial capacity. The forces we had fought represented less than 10% of humanity's actual military strength. Several audience members made sounds of shock and disbelief. Johnson showed us images of massive shipyards, advanced weapon systems, and military formations that had never been deployed during the conflict. Humanity had been prepared to escalate the war far beyond anything we had imagined. Zixthyla stepped away from the podium and faced the audience directly. I realized then that the war had never been about survival for humanity. It had been about establishing their position in galactic society. They had been willing to accept massive casualties and territorial losses because they were playing a much longer game. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The war officially ended with the Treaty of New Geneva, which established humanity as a full member of galactic society with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. But I understood that the real war had never stopped. The commander's forearms trembled as she prepared to deliver her final warning. Humans are still among us. They work in our governments, our militaries, our research institutions, and our commercial enterprises. They are still watching, still learning, still preparing for whatever comes next. She looked directly at the younger veterans in the audience. To those of you who think humans have become peaceful members of galactic society, I offer this warning. Humans don't change their nature. They only change their tactics. Zixthyla moved toward the edge of the platform. Every human trader who visits your world is gathering intelligence. Every human diplomat who attends your meetings is mapping your political structure. Every human student who studies at your universities is learning your weaknesses. Her voice grew stronger as she delivered her final words. Humans convinced us. They were primitive and harmless while they prepared to dominate the galaxy. They made us believe the war was over while they consolidated their victory. They turned our own trust against us. Zixthyla stepped down from the platform, but before leaving, she pointed toward the back of the hall where a human janitor was quietly cleaning the floor. Even here, in this sanctuary for veterans of the human wars, they maintain their presence. Bobby Chun has been cleaning this hall for 5 years. He knows every alien who attends these meetings, every story that gets told, every secret that gets shared. The human janitor looked up at the sound of his name and gave Zixthyla a small nod of acknowledgement. The war never ended, Zixthala said as she walked toward the exit. It just became invisible. The Veterans Hall remained silent long after she had gone, every alien present understanding that they were still being watched, still being studied, still being outmaneuvered by an enemy that had convinced them it was a friend.